Hello. I said over a week ago that there were a couple of tarot decks that I have that make me happy in the sense that when I pick them up and flick through them, it just makes me glad that I did. They're great to look at and great to think about and all of that. And I did a walkthrough of why the Noble Marseille Tarot makes me happy, and it occurred to me that a week and a bit on I'd sort of better get round to doing the other one. And the other one is this here, The Lost Code of Tarot by Andrea Aste. Very interesting deck, very interesting deck. I guess a lot of people will know it, although having said that, there isn't all that much that I can find on YouTube about it, except what is on Andrea Aste's own channel, which I will attempt to link to below the video when I'm done uploading it. Never tried linking to something on here before. Let's see how it goes. This is a really interesting one. When I first heard of it, I wondered briefly if it might be a sort of elaborate joke about tarot and all of that. And I decided it's not quite, but it's an example of one of those things where there's a great quote from an old Doctor Who story where somebody says to the doctor, something's going on, and they say to the doctor, "Are you serious?" And the doctor says, "About what I do, yes, but not necessarily about how I do it." And this is a prime example of that. It's an example of somebody being serious about what they do, but not necessarily about how they do it. Let me show you. For those of you who are into tarot boxes, this is one of those lovely ones that has a magnet on the side. Oh, very nice. I've also got to be slightly careful today. It is a very dark day here in the north of England, very dark, and the candles that you see in the corner of the picture are partly there because candles are nice things to have, I thought that actually my backgrounds on these videos looked a bit boring, but partly they're there to give a bit of extra light. It is so dark today, it's absurd. Anyway, here we go. Here is the deck of cards that comes with the Lost Code of Tarot. It's very good. If you're interested in cardstock, it actually feels quite thin, but it's actually not. It's quite a thick deck. Very flexible. My only slight quibble with the cards themselves are that if you bend them, like if you're doing a riffle shuffle or something like that, they are sometimes not entirely happy about bending all the way back again. They're not quite as flexible as you might want them to be, but that's neither here nor there. They are very odd looking cards. They're made to look aged and ancient, and I'll tell you why. It's because the whole premise behind this deck is that during an archaeological investigation in London in 2010, the archaeologists came across an underground chamber which had been the home of an alchemist back in the 16th century. And in this underground chamber they found several things, but they found the alchemist's Book of Shadows, and they found a deck of cards. And the conceit, if you like, the fictional setup for this deck is that this is the original primeval tarot from which all others were derived, from this alchemist living in the 16th century, but we're led to believe he'd actually been alive for a good couple of hundred years before that. Very intriguing setup, very clever, and I'll say more about that when we actually have had a bit of a look through the cards. Like I did with the Noble, I'm just going to show a few of the cards that really interest me and intrigue me and all that, and actually in this case really make me smile, because one thing this deck is funny. and I think it is good to have a deck that you can have a laugh with. Yeah, it's good for that. I like it. Let's sort out the cards I want to show. Put that to one side. Straight at the top, there are a couple of extra cards in this deck, which, how to say, the accompanying book doesn't give quotes meanings for the cards the way that some do. It's very different, and I'll say why in a bit. So you know, you're left to yourself to decide what everything means. And there's a couple of extra cards outside the normal ones that are included, and this is one of them. Let's have a look at that. And for obvious reasons, I call her the reader. She's there with cards laid out in front of her, and another one right up in front of her face. Is she looking at the card? Is she looking at us? And there she is with a pair of horns as well. I think that's wonderful. This always makes me think of Camellia Elias, that great and wonderful tarot reader and writer, and her great catchphrase, "Read like the devil." You know, here's this horned tarot reader. Great fun, great fun. All of the cards are done in this sort of line work. The only colours used are the obviously the background colour, which is this aged parchment look, and then red and black. Those are the only colours that are used. Another slight quibble there is that I'm colourblind and I can barely see red. I can easily see red as black, so I sometimes miss where the red is on these cards, but that can't be helped. So some of you might see more in these cards than I do, actually. There you go. And straight at the top of the tarot proper is the Fool. Say from the outset that this is Aste takes most of his inspiration from the Marseille deck and also from the Visconti Sforza. I suspect he's looked at quite a few other decks as well, and here there are references. To me, this looks very like a Marseille Fool, but look, it's so lovely the way he uses line and shape, and these wonderful extravagant headdresses that you'll see all through the thing. They're gorgeous. That's a very sort of joyful Fool, looking straight out of the card at us, almost like he's saying, "Come along with me, come on, let's go on this whatever we're going on." One thing about these is that there's no labels on the cards in the way that we would understand it, but down here you'll see a set of little symbols, and these symbols are decoded in the book, and this one, if I remember right, decodes as "man without reason," man who has lost reason. So basically these are on the majors, these are the card names, but sometimes they're not quite the names we're familiar with. One thing I love about this as well is the way he draws his women. They're all so classy and elegant and characterful. And here's the Popess or High Priestess sitting very commandingly, and she starts to be labelled here. There's number 2 there, and I forget how this translates. It might be woman of spirit or spirit woman or something like that. But look at her, isn't she wonderful? And I love that the book in front of her doesn't have any writing on it. It's an empty book, because everything she needs to know is in herself. I think that's rather wonderful. The Hermit is another favourite, because here, apart from the great character of this guy, the lovely long beard wound round his staff at the bottom, and the Hindu dot, the bindi I think it's called, on the forehead. The wonderful thing about this is he's a blend of the very old hermits and the slightly more recent hermits, in that he's carrying his lantern, yeah, but he's also carrying his hourglass here. So he retains his character from the very early decks, like the Visconti Sforza, as Father Time or the Old Man. I like that. Temperance is another one that's just fun. I think on a lot of decks we're used to seeing Temperance as this rather serene looking figure. Here she seems she's doing her pouring and her balancing and all that, but she seems almost on the brink of chaos, almost on the very edge of it all going horribly wrong, with this wobbly flow of water from one jar to another and a wild hair there. It looks like she's just about barely coping with the task, which I really like as a thought. I like that very much. So that's the majors. The minors. So it is a pip deck. Beautifully drawn again. Here on the Ace of Batons, you've got all sorts of little extras, like the leaves falling off the wand and this snake wound round it. He's retranslated the coins or discs as Ouroboroses, Ouroboroi, whatever the plural of Ouroboros is. So they're a theme running all the way through the coins suit. Beautifully drawn, beautifully drawn. The cups are great fun. Lots of different styles of cups. Butterflies make an appearance throughout the deck for, well, whatever reason. You can see something in that or not as you choose. One thing I really like about this, I don't know if you can quite see it, I can just about see it on my monitor. This cup seems to be full of sparkling wine or something. There's bubbles coming off it. I think that's really sweet, very celebratory. A 10 of cups that celebrates the cups. I like that. The court cards are fantastic. They really are. Sometimes not all that easy to identify, especially in the coins suit, but they are beautifully drawn. This guy, this is the Page of Swords, my card. This is the Page of Swords. And look at him. He's got... This guy could have stepped out of a 1983 new romantic pop band, you know, and no questions asked. Look at the style of him. And that ridiculous sword that's as tall as he is. Great fun. I like that a lot. Yeah. The knights again are great fun, and they're all mounted on these strange beasts. There's one on a huge elephant, and this one, the Knight of Cups, is on an animal that could just have stepped out of a Dr. Seuss book. It's just mad and bizarre, and probably some sort of ostrich, don't know. There you go, lovely. The real glory of this deck though is its queens. I love the queens in this deck. Every one of them has such attitude. It's fantastic. Here's the Queen of Coins. Look at that. In a Madonna style bustier there, and hand on hip saying, yeah, go on, yeah, fantastic. Queen of Batons, looking like she's ready for a fight. Wonderful. Again with these extravagant headdresses, isn't she fantastic? the slightly tipsy Queen of Cups with her brighter Frankenstein hairdo is wonderful. My favourite though is the Queen of Swords. There she is. She's smoking a pipe. That's great. But look at her sword. She's using her sword as a hairpin. How fantastic is that? That is just wonderful. All of these images are hugely inventive. You know, as a work of sheer imagination. Andrea Aste has done something really intriguingly wonderful here. It really has. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. But actually, one of the best things about the whole thing is the book. It's called the Book of Shadows. And like I say, it's not a traditional guide to the deck, but I don't think that's the last word on it. What it does is it starts out telling this fictional story of the discovery of the alchemist's house and how the deck and the Book of Shadows was discovered. Then you get a lot of pages which are pictures purportedly from the alchemist's Book of Shadows. Then those pictures are interpreted, and then there's more of the story spun, and more of that and more of that. So what he's doing is he's building up a whole fictional backstory for the deck. And that was what at first made me think, well, is this some sort of elaborate joke? But it's not. It's much, much cleverer than that. There are references in the book, and more importantly references in Andrea Aste's videos here on YouTube, to people like, well, especially Italo Calvino, the Italian writer. And Italo Calvino wrote two books which I think are particularly important here. One was Invisible Cities, and the other, even more importantly, was The Castle Across Destinies. Now, The Castle Across Destinies is a book I'll come back to in a later video, but basically it uses tarot to tell stories as a source of stories. Hang on, my copy is right within reach. Here's The Castle Across Destinies, and you'll see he uses tarot to tell stories, and he uses the Visconti Sforza and the Marseille, and you know, he ends up with, he calls it almost like a crossword puzzle made out of tarot cards instead of out of words, and all that. And there's a lot in what Calvino has done in there that Andrea Aste is doing here, I think. The images that supposedly come from the alchemist's Book of Shadows, he uses to tell little, very short vignette, one-page stories. The cosmic fish, the star trees, that sort of thing. You know, he uses those images to spin these stories in a way that Calvino does in The Castle Across Destinies, but in a way in which he also does in Invisible Cities. And I think what's going on here is that Aste is telling us this is how he wants us to use his tarot deck. He wants us to use it as a springboard for the imagination. He wants us to take an image and spin a story with it, to create imaginative fiction or fact, whichever, with it. And that's why I say, in a sense, this is a guide to the tarot. It doesn't give us keywords, it doesn't give us card meanings, but it says, look, here is a way in which I can work with images to create pictures in words. He uses visual pictures to create pictures in words, and as an exercise of the imagination. And I think that is where the whole thing might not be serious about how it's doing this, but it's certainly serious about what it's doing. It's fantastic. There are other references as well. At one point in the book, an occult sect comes into it, and there's a criminal organisation and things. And I think there he's beginning to reference works like Umberto Eco's book Foucault's Pendulum, you know, where the protagonists come up with a conspiracy theory that is entirely a work of fiction, but actually turns out to be true. Foucault's Pendulum is a very funny, tragic book. It's not for nothing it's been called the thinking man's Da Vinci Code. It's brilliant. And there are hints of that in here too. So, you've got Calvino, you've got Eco, you've got all of that. This is a very clever piece of work. And it just thrills me all the time. I'm going to call it a day there on this one, but I'm going to finish with a little bit of text from the very end of this book. At the very end of the book, Aste sort of steps out of character and gives us a last paragraph on the last but one page. And I just want to read a little bit about that. We live in a forest of ever-changing meanings and symbols that we call reality. I've always suspected that this reality is an illusion, a mirage of millions of images in a mosaic dancing in front of our eyes. I wanted to show this by capturing some of these images and giving sense to them by creating a parallel reality. Through my art, I began playing with mixing our real world, its history and people, with fictional elements, characters and places. I wanted to suspend belief and free the power of imagination by leading you into a parallel dimension at a point in time where magic was a force of nature to be tamed and the world was a mere blank spot on a map waiting to be traced. A fantastic dimension where reality and non-reality are so entwined that it is impossible to discern any clear trace of boundaries between them, giving us pause to consider the role of imagination and art in the representation and comprehension of our very existence, of the world and of life. This is the real power of imagination and art. Like a lighthouse, they guide us in our journey, showing how things could be, visions of a future to come. Thanks for watching.